The hushed silence of the 42nd floor office, typically broken only by the soft hum of computers, was shattered by Daniel Richardson's voice. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded, his words echoing through the quiet space. It was 2 o'clock in the morning on a Friday, and Daniel, the formidable president of Richardson and Associates, one of New York's largest financial consulting firms, had only returned to retrieve some forgotten documents. He stared, disbelief warring with a creeping unease, at the small figure kneeling on the pristine marble floor, vigorously scrubbing a non-existent stain. The girl slowly raised her head, her large, expressive eyes meeting his gaze without fear, though her small hands trembled slightly as she clutched the damp cloth. "I'm cleaning, sir," she replied, her voice remarkably clear for someone who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. "Mrs. Johnson said if I did a good job, I could sleep in the storeroom tonight." A chill, cold and sharp, ran down Daniel's spine. "Sleep in the storeroom? Here. Your name is Isabella, sir. Isabella Turner. I'm 8.5 years old," she recited with a precision that churned Daniel's stomach. "I know how to clean, organize papers, and I'm very quiet when I sleep. Mrs. Johnson said that's important." The calmness with which this child delivered such stark information hit Daniel like a physical blow. For 43 years, he had meticulously built a financial empire based on cold numbers and calculated decisions, yet he had never encountered a situation that so profoundly challenged his understanding of reality. "Isabella, where are your parents?" Daniel crouched down in front of her, only now truly noticing how oversized her clothes were and how worn her sneakers appeared. "My mom works the night shift at the hospital," Isabella replied, her small hands immediately returning to scrub the floor, a familiar, almost automatic motion. "She's a nurse, but she said she can't take me home because things are complicated there." Daniel's gaze swept around his luxurious office, taking in the panoramic view of Central Park, then settled back on the small girl, working with movements too precise for her tender age. Something didn't make sense. "What about Mrs. Johnson? Who is she?" Isabella paused, looking at him with an expression that mixed exhaustion with a disturbing resignation. "She's the cleaning supervisor," Isabella stated. "She said my mother should be grateful I have a job here, and that I should learn how things work at an early age." The words echoed in Daniel's mind as he watched Isabella resume her work. Margaret Johnson, the cleaning supervisor, was known for her impeccable efficiency, but also for a certain dismissive attitude toward minority employees. Daniel had always ignored the subtle comments, focusing only on results. "Isabella, have you done this before?" he asked, his voice softer now, tinged with a nascent concern. "A few times," she admitted, "when my mom can't drop me off somewhere else. Mrs. Johnson said it's better for me to learn to be helpful at a young age." She hesitated, then added, because people like me have to work twice as hard to get half as much." Daniel felt a slow, simmering anger begin to boil in his veins, yet he kept his composure. For years, he had been the typical executive, focused solely on numbers and strategies. But something in the quiet dignity of this child was awakening a part of him he hadn't known existed. "Isabella, drop that rag," he said, reaching out his hand. "You shouldn't be here." She looked at him suspiciously, as if adults promising better things were dangerous territory. "But if I don't finish, Mrs. Johnson will be mad at my mom, and my mom needs this job." The heartbreaking simplicity of that explanation struck Daniel like a revelation. Here was an 8-year-old child carrying the immense weight of protecting her mother's employment, working in a corporate office in the dead of night. And all of it was happening under the very roof of his own company. As Daniel processed the situation, something in his eyes changed. For the first time in decades, he wasn't thinking about profits or market strategies. He was thinking about justice. "Isabella," he said, his voice now laden with a determination that even the little girl could sense, "I think you and I need to have a very serious talk with Mrs. Johnson." What Daniel couldn't imagine was that this conversation would reveal a network of exploitation that went far beyond what his eyes could see, and that little Isabella, with her quiet strength, held secrets that would transform not only his company but the very way he saw the world. The following day, Daniel arrived at the office 2 hours earlier than his usual meticulous schedule. His conversation with Isabella had stretched until 4 in the morning, And every word the girl had spoken echoed in his mind like an alarm he couldn't switch off. He was still deep in thought, feigning attention to reports, when Margaret Johnson appeared at his office door at 7:15 a.m., her posture rigid, her expression carefully controlled. "Mr. Richardson," she began, "I heard there was a misunderstanding last night." Daniel looked up, his gaze piercing. "Misunderstanding? Is that what you call an 8-year-old girl working in my office at 2 in the morning?" Margaret adjusted her glasses with a calculated, almost imperceptible movement. "The girl's mother, Nurse Carla Turner, begged me to let her daughter stay here for a few hours while she worked extra shifts at the hospital. I thought teaching responsibility at an early age would be educational." Educational. Daniel repeated the word, tasting it like something bitter on his tongue. "And what kind of education exactly were you providing?" "Mr. Richardson, with all due respect," Margaret's voice took on a condescending tone Daniel had never noticed before, a subtle superiority that now grated on him. "People like the Turner family need to learn that nothing in life is free. I'm offering this girl an opportunity to understand the value of work." Daniel leaned back in his chair, watching Margaret choose her words with deliberate care. For 8 years, he had considered her impeccably efficient and dedicated as she supervised the cleaning services. Now, with a chilling clarity, he realized he had mistaken systematic cruelty for competence. "And where exactly did you grow up, Margaret?" Daniel asked, his voice dangerously calm. "In Connecticut, sir. My father was," she hesitated, realizing the trap in the question. "Let me guess," Daniel leaned forward, his voice a low rumble. "Lawyer, doctor, accountant. Someone who never needed an 8-year-old to work to keep a roof over the family's head." Margaret straightened her shoulders, her mask of politeness beginning to slip, revealing the rigid conviction beneath. "Mr. Richardson, I don't see how my family background relates to the need to maintain proper disciplinary standards among subordinate employees." "Subordinate employees?" Daniel repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air. "Isabella is 8 years old, Margaret. She's not an employee. She's a child." "A child who needs to learn her place in the social hierarchy," Margaret retorted, her voice gaining a cold firmness that laid bare her true thoughts. "Mr. Richardson, you built this empire by understanding that there are people who give orders and people who obey. I am simply ensuring that the next generation understands that reality." Daniel felt something cold, a profound sense of disillusionment, run through his veins. There it was, the raw, unvarnished truth. Margaret didn't see Isabella as a vulnerable child. She saw her as someone who needed to learn her place, and that place, in Margaret's rigid mind, was eternally below people like them. "Margaret, where is Carla Turner right now?" "Working at the General Hospital, sir. Double shift to make ends meet. She's a hard-working woman." The way Margaret said hard-working carried layers of meaning that Daniel could now decipher. It wasn't a compliment, but a categorization, a label applied to those she deemed beneath her. "And where is Isabella when her mother works those double shifts?" Margaret hesitated for the first time. "Well, there's a social program in the community, but it's frequented by people of the same social class. I thought exposing the girl to a more refined environment would be beneficial to her development." Daniel rose slowly, walking over to the window overlooking Central Park. Below, children played freely in expensive playgrounds, while their nannies, many of them black, like Carla Turner, watched from a distance. "Margaret, do you have children?" "No, sir. I've dedicated my life to my career." "Then explain something to me." Daniel turned to face her, his gaze unwavering. "How exactly did you become an expert in child development for children from families you clearly despise?" The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret opened and closed her mouth several times, like a fish out of water. "Mr. Richardson, I think you're misunderstanding my intentions." "Your intentions," Daniel interrupted, his voice cutting through the air, "were to teach an 8-year-old girl that people like her exist to serve people like us, correct?" Margaret lifted her chin defiantly, the last vestiges of her polite mask gone. "Mr. Richardson, the real world has hierarchies. I don't see a problem with preparing people to accept their place in those hierarchies." There it was, the complete confession, spoken with the unnerving calmness of someone utterly convinced of their own righteousness. Daniel returned to his desk and picked up the phone. "Jennifer, I need you to cancel all my appointments for today. Something urgent has come up." Margaret frowned. "Mr. Richardson, I hope you're not going to make any rash decisions based on—" "Margaret," Daniel interrupted, his voice now laden with an intensity she had never heard before, "you just revealed to me exactly who you are. And now I'm going to show you exactly who I can be." As Margaret left his office, visibly shaken, Daniel remained staring out the window. For 43 years, he had built his life focusing exclusively on numbers, strategies, and profits. He had never realized how many Margarets he had employed, how many Carlas he had indirectly harmed, and how many Isabellas had suffered under his roof without him even noticing. But now, he had noticed. And when Daniel Richardson noticed something, he took action. What Margaret Johnson couldn't imagine was that their conversation had awakened something in Daniel that had been dormant for decades. Not just indignation, but a profound sense of justice he thought he had lost in the cold corridors of the corporate world. Every condescending word she had uttered was now fueling a determination she could never understand. 3 days had passed since his searing confrontation with Margaret, yet Daniel couldn't shake Isabella from his mind. Every time he walked through the gleaming hallways of his company, he saw only numbers on spreadsheets where he should have seen real people with families and stories. "Jennifer," he called his secretary, his voice firm. "I need a meeting with the entire human resources team today at 3 o'clock. "Mr. Richardson, that's unusual," she replied, a hint of surprise in her tone. "May I ask why?" Daniel hesitated, then answered, "Internal audit. I need to better understand our hiring protocols." At 2:45, Daniel drove down to the General Hospital. Finding Carla Turner wasn't difficult. She was an exhausted black nurse, rushing between patients on the afternoon shift, precisely as Margaret had described with such disdain. "Nurse Turner." Daniel approached during a brief pause. "I'm Daniel Richardson from Richardson and Associates." Carla's face contorted with instant fear. "Mr. Richardson, if this is about Isabella, I can explain. She won't bother you anymore, I promise." Margaret said. Margaret said what? Daniel felt the familiar anger rising in his chest. That if Isabella was seen there again, I would lose my recommendation for the advanced nursing program. Carla looked around nervously. "Sir, I know I shouldn't have let her stay there, but I had no other choice. The social program closes at 6 o'clock, and I work until 10 o'clock. Daniel processed the information. Margaret hadn't just exploited a child, she had used blackmail to silence the mother, threatening her professional future. "Carla, may I call you that?" She nodded nervously. "Margaret has no authority to cancel academic recommendations. Did this come through my office?" She said she had complete authority over human resources decisions. Lie number 2, Daniel thought, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. "Carla, would you sign a statement about what Margaret told you?" "Mr. Richardson, I need this job. Isabella needs me to have this job." "What if I guaranteed that your job would be safe? More than that, what if I guaranteed that you would get into the advanced nursing program, regardless of what Margaret says?" Carla's eyes filled with tears, a mix of disbelief and overwhelming relief. "Why would you do that?" "Because your daughter taught me something I had forgotten about justice." Back at the office, the human resources meeting revealed far more than Daniel had expected. In addition to Margaret's individual actions, there was a systematic pattern he had never noticed. "Mr. Richardson," said Patricia Miller, the human resources manager, avoiding eye contact. "Our diversity ratings are technically within the law." "Technically?" Daniel pressed. Patricia exchanged uncomfortable glances with Margaret. "Well, we do have minority employees, but they tend to stay in specific positions." "What kind of specific positions?" "Cleaning, security, general services," Margaret replied with practiced calm. "Positions where they can contribute appropriately based on their natural skills." There it was. It wasn't just about Isabella. It was about an entire system he had unknowingly allowed to flourish. And in executive positions. Daniel prompted. Patricia cleared her throat. Mr. Richardson, we have strict qualification policies, which are, the silence that followed was revealing. Margaret, Daniel turned to her. Could you explain to me exactly what qualifications Isabella lacks to, say, play on a playground instead of cleaning offices at 2 in the morning? Mr. Richardson, this is a specific situation. How specific are the situations of all the other black employees who mysteriously can only work in appropriate positions here? Margaret straightened up, her mask of politeness finally slipping completely. Mr. Richardson, I see no problem with maintaining efficient organizational structures based on natural aptitudes and realistic expectations. Natural aptitudes. Daniel repeated slowly. Patricia, do you agree with Margaret's assessment of natural aptitudes? Patricia hesitated, realizing she was walking into a minefield. Mr. Richardson, we follow established protocols. Protocols established by whom? By Margaret, sir. Daniel leaned back in his chair, a cold wave washing over him. For 8 years, he had allowed Margaret Johnson to implement a system of corporate apartheid right under his nose. When the meeting ended, Daniel stayed in his office late. At 9 p.m., he made a crucial call. Michael, it's Daniel Richardson. I know it's late, but I need to hire you for something urgent. Michael Santos was the best corporate investigator Daniel knew, a brilliant lawyer specializing in employment discrimination cases. Daniel, it's 9 o'clock at night. This must be serious. More serious than anything I've ever faced. I need you to investigate my own company. Every hire, every promotion, every firing over the last 10 years. You're asking me to find evidence that could destroy your company. Michael, Daniel's voice was tight with emotion. I'm asking you to find evidence that could save my soul. 2 hours later, Michael was in his office with a team of 3 investigators. Daniel, based on what you've told me, this could be bigger than we realize. If Margaret implemented a system like this with your implicit approval. She didn't have my approval, Daniel interrupted, his gaze distant. She had my negligence. And that may be worse. The legal implications are enormous. We're talking about potential lawsuits in the millions, federal investigation. Michael, do you have children? 2. If your children found out that their father built a company that systematically prevents children like Isabella from having a future, what would they think of you? Michael closed his laptop. We're going to find everything, Daniel. Every email, every decision, every pattern. But you need to be prepared, this is going to hurt. It already hurts, Daniel replied quietly. As Michael's team worked through the night, Daniel stared out the office window. Below, the city slept, including an 8-year-old girl who should have been playing with dolls instead of worrying about where she would sleep the next night. For the first time in decades, Daniel Richardson wasn't thinking about profits or corporate strategy. He was thinking about how to explain to Isabella that the world didn't have to be the way Margaret Johnson wanted it to be. What Margaret didn't know was that every condescending word she had uttered over the years was now being meticulously documented, every discriminatory decision being mapped out, every life she had affected being catalogued. And when Daniel Richardson decided to document something, he did so with the same relentless precision he had used to build an empire. Only this time, he was building something completely different. He was building justice. The following Monday, Daniel called an extraordinary meeting of the executive board, a rare event that signaled the gravity of the impending discussions. Margaret Johnson entered the conference room at 9 a.m. with her usual confident stride, utterly unaware that she was walking straight into her own professional execution. Gentlemen, Daniel began, addressing the 12 board members, his voice calm but firm. Today, we are going to discuss some findings regarding our human resources protocols. Margaret settled in quietly, adjusting her glasses with her characteristic arrogance. Next to her, Patricia Miller looked visibly nervous, but Margaret attributed that to the natural pressure of corporate presentations. Michael, Daniel motioned to the corporate investigator waiting quietly in the corner of the room. You may begin. Michael Santos approached the projector with a formidable stack of documents. Over the past 72 hours, We have conducted an audit of this company's hiring processes over the last 10 years. Margaret frowned. Mr. Richardson, I was not informed of any audit. Margaret, Daniel interrupted her with icy calm, his gaze unwavering, you'll want to hear this in silence. The first image projected was devastating. A graph showing that of the 243 employees hired under Margaret's direct management, only 17 were black, and all were assigned exclusively to cleaning and security positions. That's a statistical coincidence. Margaret began, but her voice was already trembling, her composure visibly cracking. Michael clicked to the next screen. It was an email from Margaret to Patricia regarding a candidate named Williams. Excellent qualifications, but we need to consider whether he would fit the cultural profile of the team. I suggest directing him to a more suitable position. The silence in the room was deafening. Margaret turned pale instantly. That email is out of context, she tried to interject, but Michael was already showing 15 similar emails, all using the same coded language to systematically exclude black candidates from higher positions. And now, Michael continued relentlessly, the phone recordings. The audio echoed around the room, chillingly clear, revealing Margaret's unmistakable voice. We need someone who has the right profile, you know? Someone the clients feel comfortable with. You know what I mean. Margaret stood up abruptly, her face a mask of fury. That's illegal wiretapping. All done on company equipment, during business hours, Michael smiled coldly, the legal property of Richardson and Associates. Daniel watched Margaret begin to unravel, to panic. For 8 years, she had operated her systematic discrimination, thinking she was protected by subtle codes and plausible deniability. Now, every word, every discriminatory act, was being laid bare. And finally, Michael saved the worst for last, the case of Carla Turner. Margaret visibly cringed as she heard her own voice played back, the recording where she had clearly blackmailed Carla, coercing a desperate mother into accepting that her 8-year-old daughter would work as a cleaner. This is a setup. Margaret exploded, completely losing her composure, her voice cracking with indignation. Daniel, you're sabotaging me over one isolated incident. Isolated. Daniel rose slowly from his chair, his presence commanding the room. 47 families systematically harmed, an 8-year-old child forced to work, that's isolated. Margaret looked around the room, desperately searching for support, but she found only faces of discomfort and visible disgust. The discrimination suits could run into the 8 figures, Michael continued, his voice grim. A federal investigation is inevitable. Margaret finally understood. It wasn't just about Isabella. It was about an entire system of discrimination that she had meticulously built, believing she was safe behind her position of power. Margaret, Daniel looked her straight in the eye, his voice resonating with cold authority. You have a choice. Resign now with a letter acknowledging philosophical differences, or face termination for cause and lawsuits for discrimination and child labor. Child labor, she whispered, tears finally beginning to fall, not from regret, but from pure, raw anger at being exposed. Forcing an 8-year-old to work in exchange for shelter is exactly that. Margaret Johnson left the room, carrying only her purse, leaving behind 8 years of power she had used to perpetuate a system she believed to be natural and unassailable. At the door, she turned one last time, searching for some sign that this was merely a nightmare. Daniel watched her leave, without a single word of pity. True justice, he realized, does not come from shouting, but from the cold, systematic exposure of the truth. As the stunned board members processed what they had witnessed, Daniel thought of Isabella, who was at school at that moment. Something Margaret had tried to convince Carla was an unnecessary luxury for people like them. What Margaret could never have imagined was that her downfall was only the beginning of something much bigger. Daniel had discovered that building justice required the same relentless precision he had used to build wealth. And when he applied that precision to something beyond mere profit, the results were irreversible. But the real transformation was yet to come, not just within the company, but in the life of an 8-year-old girl who would finally discover what it truly meant to have someone fighting unequivocally on her side. 6 months later, Daniel stood in the same office where this profound journey had begun, but now everything felt transformed. Through the expansive window, he could see Isabella playing joyfully in the park across the street, not as a child forced to work, but as any 8-year-old should be, free, laughing, simply being a kid. The changes at Richardson and Associates had been nothing short of radical. The new human resources director, Carla Turner, yes, the very nurse Margaret had blackmailed, had implemented policies that quickly became a national model for other companies. Mr. Richardson, Jennifer, his secretary, entered with a folder. The results of the semester's diversity audit are in. Daniel opened the documents and a genuine smile spread across his face. In just 6 months, the company had hired 42 new employees, 31 of whom were from ethnic minorities, all placed in executive and technical positions based purely on merit and qualifications. And there's more, Jennifer continued. Forbes magazine wants to do a story on our corporate transformation. It seems other companies are copying our model. Across town, Margaret Johnson was leaving her 3rd failed job interview of the week. Her once unassailable reputation in the corporate world had become toxic after her discriminatory methods were exposed. The lawsuits filed by the families she had harmed had cost her savings and her home. Unfortunately, we don't have a position that's right for you, her last interviewer had said, using the exact kind of coded language Margaret herself had once employed. Ironically, Margaret now knew precisely how it felt to be judged not on her qualifications, but on subtle, systematic biases. Meanwhile, Carla Turner was in her new, spacious office. Yes, she had left the hospital to become the Director of Human Resources at Richardson and Associates. The advanced nursing program Margaret had threatened to sabotage. Carla had not only completed it but had done so with a full scholarship, funded by the company itself. "Mommy!" Isabella burst into the office after school. "Today I learned about financial math. The teacher said I can be anything I want when I grow up." "And what do you want to be?" asked Carla, hugging her daughter tightly. "I want to have a company like Mr. Daniel, but one that helps children like me study." Daniel, who had arrived for a meeting, overheard the conversation from the doorway. "Isabella, you know you can count on me for that, right?" The girl ran to hug him. In recent months, Daniel had become an unofficial father figure to Isabella, not out of pity, but out of genuine admiration for the intelligence and strength of character of this extraordinary child. "Mr. Daniel," Isabella looked up at him with a seriousness that sometimes surprised him. "Thank you for seeing me as a child that night, and not as Margaret saw me." Those words touched Daniel deeply. For 43 years, he had measured success only in numbers and profits. Now, he understood that true success was measured by the number of lives you were able to transform positively. Daniel's company not only prospered after the changes, it became more profitable. It turns out that when you hire and promote people based on actual talent rather than prejudice, the quality of work improves dramatically. "You know what the most ironic part of this whole story is?" Daniel said to Carla as they watched Isabella drawing at her desk. Margaret thought she was protecting the company by maintaining standards. In fact, she was preventing us from accessing the best talent. Carla smiled knowingly. Prejudice has never been a smart business strategy. It's just fear disguised as tradition. That night, Daniel went home, reflecting on how a single decision, the choice to truly see Isabella as a child who deserved protection, had transformed not only his company but his entire understanding of leadership, fairness, and social responsibility. Margaret Johnson had tried to teach an 8-year-old girl about social hierarchies and knowing her place. Instead, she herself learned that in a just society, the only place that truly matters is the one you build with integrity, competence, and respect for others. 2 years later, Isabella Turner Richardson, yes, Daniel had officially adopted her, was on her first day at the best private school in town, attending on a full scholarship created specifically for children from working families. And Margaret? She finally secured a job as a cleaning supervisor in a small, nondescript office building, earning precisely what Carla had earned when she was blackmailed years earlier. Life, it seems, has a curious way of teaching humility to those who refuse to learn it willingly. This story reminds us that true justice doesn't come from destroying our enemies, but from building a world where future Isabellas never have to work to prove they deserve to exist.